Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who's joining us today and in the future to talk about publishing and promoting Palestinian literature. I'm Lynx Qualey, founder of ArabLit, a publishing collective focused on Arabic literature and translation. And I'm joined today by three other members of the Publishers for Palestine, who I'll introduce in a moment. First, for those who aren't familiar, Publishers for Palestine is a global collective of publishers and others who work in publishing around the world who stand for justice, freedom of expression, and the power of the written word. You can find our statement at publishersforpalestine.org, where you can also find our contact information if you want to participate in future actions, such as Read Palestine Week, which is coming up at the end of November and beginning of December. So first, I want to introduce Rob Page, who is the founder and CEO of Comma Press, publisher and editor of more than 20 anthologies, as well as coordinator of a number of publishing development initiatives. Comma Press has brought out many beautiful books featuring Palestinian writers, including, but not limited to, Palestine Plus 100, The Book of Gaza, The Drone Eats With Me, and Don't Look Left. We're also joined by Hannah Moushabeck, who runs Interlink Books, which is the only mid-sized Palestinian-owned publishing house in the US and possibly the only Palestinian-owned publishing house in the US. She's author of the award-winning picture book Homeland, My Father Dreams of Palestine, and Interlink has published many books by Palestinian authors since its founding in 1987, from children's books to cookbooks to fiction to memoir. And Elizabeth Briggs also joins us. She's editorial director at the London-based Saqi Books, which recently published the anthology Daybreak in Gaza and has been publishing pioneering Palestinian fiction such as Sahar Khalifa's Wild Thorns, groundbreaking poetry anthologies such as the one edited by Ataf al-Shair, art books, memoir, and more. So the idea is that the group of us will introduce a sort of a range of not just Palestinian authors, but also how Palestinian authors are being promoted by these publishing houses and some of the challenges as well. So I wanted to start with fiction, which is a major part of all these publishing houses' lists, and to kind of start with Ra. I'm a big fan of all of the Comma short story anthologies, which are a great read in and of themselves, but also a way to learn about a lot of writers in a short space. So from Palestine, you've published Book of Ramallah, The Book of Gaza, Palestine Plus 100, and I wondered if you could introduce us to some of the writers that you've gotten to know through some of these anthologies.
Thank you, Marcia. Yeah. So just to give you a bit of background, I set up Comma Press to specialize in short fiction. And one of the central sort of components or facets of short stories are they're very international and they're very translatable. They move from one culture to another very, very easily, and they translate very, very well. And so we couldn't really focus on the short story without putting translated short stories at the center of what we do. So we have a Book of the City series, which has been running since 2007 or something, where we just bring together 10 stories by 10 different writers, if in translation, by 10 different translators from each of the cities as a way of kind of pluralizing the reader's expectations and what the reader gets from any particular city. So we began that series with some British cities, and in 2014 we took it to Gaza. So I had known an editor and writer, Ataf Abu Saif, since 2009. He had written a number of short story collections and novels, and he'd appeared at the Manchester Literature Festival. And so I approached him in 2014 to compile an anthology of short stories from Gaza. Within that, he had a range of writers of different ages. So it ranged from Gharib Asqalani, who passed away a couple of years ago, through to younger writers like Nehru's Kamut and Asma al-Ghul. And it was obvious that there was a lot of writing going on in the city, and there were lots of different schools and lots of different groups where writers gathered. That project led to me working with Atif Abu Saif for over a number of years, and I'll come back to our work with him. But it also opened the door to me to a number of other projects published by other publishing houses. There was a couple of books by Just World, which is Helena Cobham's publishing house in America. Just World brought out a book called Gaza Writes Back. And when we tried to put on various events around the Book of Gaza. We managed to get Atif out once, but we had like 3 other attempts to get other writers out. And they all failed because of visa applications, or writers weren't able to get out either the Rafah border or the Erez border. So so I found myself putting on events and then having to kind of fill some seats because the writers didn't get their British visas. So I got to know some other writers that have been published by Helena Cobham with Gaza Writes Back. So I got to know a writer called Rawan Yagi. Rawan Yagi was very young at the time. She'd just come over to the UK and done a scholarship at Oxford. The scholarship had been set up by fellow students who'd raised money to pay for her kind of scholarship. She spent a bit of time studying, I think it was English and Italian at Oxford, and she was a very interesting writer, really just starting out. But we worked with her on a number of commissions later on. So she's a writer we really kind of were very excited about, along with others like Nehru's Karmut. Then in 2019, a lot happened between 2014 and 2019, including me meeting my wife Basma, who was a translator and interpreter, and she now works part-time at Comma as well, and she helps me put together an anthology or commission an anthology as part of Comma's Science Fiction from Beyond the West series, which is a series we call Plus 100, or Futures Past series, where we commission writers to write stories set 100 years after a specific national event. So we had a book called Iraq Plus 100, which was all set 100 years after the Iraq invasion of 2003, so set in the year 2103. And then we put together Palestine Plus 100, which was science fiction set 100 years after the Nakba, so set in the year 2048. And with that book, we kind of got to know some really interesting writers like so Anwar Hamad, who is based in the UK, writes novels, writes in Arabic, but also writes short fiction. And he wrote a beautiful story for that collection called The Key, which has been made into a short film starring Saleh Bakri. And he's a really interesting writer. A lot of these writers hadn't really written science fiction before, but took to it very well. We were very lucky to work with Mazen Maruf, who is a Palestinian writer, grew up in Lebanon and is now based in Iceland. And Mazen Maruf wrote a collection with Granta called Jokes for the Gunman. And he's a very interesting writer, very surreal, very strange, very absurdist, a little bit similar to an Iraqi writer I published called Hassan Basim, very funny, but also very dark. And he wrote a crazy story for the Palestine book about the last surviving Palestinian who was kept in a glass box in a museum, and it was also like a radioactive superhero. It was very strange. But that scenario, that sort of post-apocalyptic scenario where there are no Palestinians left, seemed a bit strange at the time, but now it doesn't seem so completely strange. Yeah, and we discovered some fantastic other writers like Maj Kayal, who's based in Haifa, and yeah, we worked with a number of writers that we definitely want to work with again, and we kind of brought in both writers from based in Palestine, Palestinian writers in the diaspora, and kind of second generation diaspora writers. So we were very lucky to work with Salim Haddad. Salim Haddad is based in America, I think, or maybe in between America and Portugal, and sometimes the UK. He had a novel out a few years ago called Guapo, and he wrote a phenomenal story for us, just exploring the idea of kind of illusions and simulations and kind of fake realities, and the idea of Gaza being a lovely place, a lovely seaside town, and there being a glitch in the kind of matrix, and the reality of Gaza sort of glitching through. So yeah, I'm waffling on. You might want to
Okay.
jump in. That's just an overview of some of our
Nope,
writing.
it's a really interesting overview, though. And I just want to add on top of something that Ra said, that we put together this issue in partnership with Majalla 28 in Gaza. And through that process, I really was surprised, and through the process of sort of interviewing the writers, just delighted at how many writers in Gaza I discovered who were extraordinary writers. Elizabeth, I wanted to kind of pivot to you next. You also recently published an anthology, Daybreak in Gaza, which includes a lot of work by Palestinian authors. And you've worked on previous anthologies too, like I remember in particular, We Wrote in Symbols, which was edited by Salma Dabar. No, Salma, yes. Which included a number of works by, yes, Palestinian women. And for me, there was an excerpt of Samia Issa's Fig Milk that really stayed with me. And I wanted to know about some of the Palestinian authors that you've discovered through working with Saqi that you wanted to tell us about. And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Marsha. You know, I was thinking about this question earlier, and I wish I had something more uplifting to say, but it really strikes me how many of the writers we've published in those anthologies have since gone quiet. And I was really struck by something Dr. Rafif Ziada, who's an incredible poet herself, and also a professor at University in London, said about how she struggles to write poetry in this landscape. It's not one she finds inspiring. And so I thought I'd bring in some names also from the diaspora and of writers outside, because actually a lot of the writers that we have published in those anthologies have found it difficult to continue to write in the way that they had hoped to. So A Map of Absence is a really exceptional and comprehensive anthology of Palestinian writing, edited by Atef Al-Shaya from the University of Westminster. And that's a really great starting point if you are new to Palestinian literature and you have yet to discover many writers, because you've got the established poets there alongside some of the younger emerging ones. Some of the writers that kind of particularly stand out to me, some of these names are well known, some of them are not so well known. Ibrahim Nasrallah is a poet novelist who's published more than 11 novels and continues to be prolific, and Fadi Judah as well. Najwan Darwish. These are all writers who are writing and active in these spaces. Lida Bada as well. So lots of more poets perhaps than prose writers, I think is something that tends to kind of break through. We haven't actually published Daybreak in Gaza yet, but that will be coming out in the first week of October. So you heard it here first, which is a really, really moving and stirring collection of writing by Gazans. It's, again, a very interesting question, because how many of the writers in that book would describe themselves as writers? I don't know. You have this really wonderfully porous space where the publishing landscape looks very different. Obviously, it's not as formal as it is here. So to my mind, if you are publishing your work on social media, or you're recording your poetry at a protest on a voice note, and it's being shared, then you are a writer. But perhaps they don't have such an official looking biography as what we might think of as writers. So particularly young people in those spaces. Amira Sakala is one who comes to mind, a Palestinian activist who founded Students for Justice in Palestine when she was studying. And I don't really want to do a disservice from Daybreak in Gaza by kind of calling out some of those writers by names, and also you know, it's a similar situation where perhaps they have been able to write some memoir, which is extremely moving and worth reading, but it might be some time before they write something else. Ahmed Al-Nouk is a brilliant writer from Gaza, and he's actually got his own collection coming out called Life and Death in Gaza, which will be published next year, I believe, by Unbound. So that's definitely one to look out for. And then perhaps some of those writers just from the diaspora, or who perhaps we don't immediately think of in the same canon, and also some of the writers who've been going for a long time, I would really recommend as well. So you already mentioned Zaha Khalifa, brilliant Palestinian writer. She's now in her late 80s. And we publish Wild Thorns, and Hannah Interlink, also our publisher. I haven't read all of Zaha's novels still. I've still got a couple more to go, so that's next on my reading list from Palestine. Isabella Hamad from the diaspora. She's you know, now extremely successful and very widely and well read, and deservedly so. So I can really recommend Enter Ghost, which was shortlisted for the Women's Prize this year. Salma Dabar, we already mentioned, as the editor of We Wrote in Symbols, writing some fantastic pieces. And Sayed Kashua as well, author of Dancing Arabs and Let It Be Morning. Yeah, definitely add him to the list too. Hope that was helpful. It's quite extensive. Lots of names.
Yes, lots of names for people to write down. Maybe we'll compile a list of them later. So Hannah, Interlink has been around since 1987. I know when I went to university, it was such an eye-opener, this Emerging World Voices series, I think, that Michelle was putting together at that time. And you've published a lot of Palestinian authors over that time. If you could just kind of tell us a bit about Interlink and its engagement with Palestinian authors.
Oh, well, thank you so much for inviting us to the table. I do wish that my father could be here because, you know, he was the one who started Interlink in 1987. Both my parents emigrated to New York in the 70s and were met with a really hateful climate against Arabs and Palestinians particularly, which, you know, sadly, we're seeing a resurgence of in this last year. And their inspiration for starting Interlink Publishing was to create a more knowledgeable readership for their three daughters to grow up in. So, you know, Interlink was started in 1987. I was also born in 1987, so I was like the second most important thing to happen to them that year. And, you know, growing up, I was constantly surrounded by poets, academics, activists from the Middle East. You know, little did I know it as a little girl running around, you know, trying to steal sweets from visiting guests, that my house was often filled with some of the most prolific Palestinian writers that we've seen. So what's been incredible is in the last 37 years, you know, we have seen a renewed interest in literature and translation. It's not quite where it is at in other countries. American readers are incredibly nationalistic, and to break through to commercial success for a novel in translation is really difficult and something that we are constantly working on. But, you know, the fiction on our list has always been really the heart of what we do. My dad likes to joke that we publish other books in order to afford to publish the fiction books that, you know, are increasingly difficult to break through with. So just to tell you about a few of them, I have to mention Wondrous Journeys and Strange Lands, because Marcia, you yourself were the translator on that incredible book. For those of you who don't know it, it's an epic adventure story that I like to think of as akin to The Alchemist, starring an empowered young woman with threads of magical realism and feminism and queerness sort of entwined in the story. It's one that is a crossover title, so we have a lot of teenagers reading it, but we also have a lot of adults. You know, this book has been assigned across college campuses in their creative writing courses. It has been a book that a lot of book clubs have started picking up. We recently just reissued it with a new cover, and we're seeing a lot of real interest in Sonia Niemer's writing. A Long Walk from Gaza, also just released here, which is Asma Alatane's coming-of-age story that was based on her own lived experience being a young girl from Gaza as she navigates both the iron fist of the patriarchy and the horrors of occupation. She has just an incredible way of writing with such nuance to humanize Palestinians in a way that so much of our media does not. And she tells this story of displacement with deep complexity and beauty. You know, as a second generation Palestinian myself, I found so much in common with her as she came of age, you know, between these two worlds. You know, other authors that we have been incredibly privileged to publish are writers like Ghassan Kanafani or Adania Shibli, who we published her first book. So it's really incredible. You know, I've joined Interlink recently about a month ago after being in corporate publishing, and to see the richness of our backlist is incredible to work with. So much so that we've started reissuing a lot of these books that were published, you know, 20 or 30 years ago with new covers. And we're seeing this incredible surge of interest in Palestinian literature, which has been really exciting to see. The Read Palestine Week from the Publishers for Palestine was a really, really big week for us. We have seen lots of different initiatives happen on social media, on TikTok, where those who maybe never would have picked up a novel in translation are suddenly turning to Palestinian voices to learn more about what's happening right now internationally. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I have to say, you must reissue Adania's first novel now that she's become such a big figure with minor detail. It's a beautiful. Ra, I wanted to ask you to talk about, so you have published now two of these of the moment memoirs of Atef Abu Saif's, one in 2014 and one quite recently. And then the recent one was so innovative because you worked with, as it was published in English, it was being translated and published sort of with a group of publishers in different languages. And I wanted you to talk about that process, like how you conceived the idea and who you first reached out to and how, you know, how that's worked.
Unmute myself. Yes, thank you. So in 2014, I found myself, everything we did this year, we did a version of in 2014. So in 2014, Atef had just returned from doing a small tour in the UK. And I was sort of emailing him and other people in the book saying, you know, are you alive? Are you okay? And they were all replying with little snippets of what they were doing day by day. just to survive. And with their permission, I kind of reposted them on my Facebook just because they were mind blowing. Just simple things like dragging your mattress into the center of the flat so it's furthest away from the windows. So when windows blow out because of compression from nearby bombing, the shards won't cut you, and things like just really simple kind of tactics for survival. They were sharing these, and people on my Facebook was just saying, "This is incredible. We need to get them to write some more." So Atef had habitually kind of written notes in Arabic, but I persuaded him to start writing them in English every day, and he emailed me them every day or every 2 days. Sometimes there's a blackout. There'll be power cuts completely, so it might disappear for a few days. And we slowly persuaded various newspapers to run them as op-eds or as kind of diary pieces, and that gradually we got into larger and larger newspapers like the Sunday Times and the Guardian in the UK, and then the Slate in America, and then eventually the New York Times. And that felt like a bit of a kind of a breakthrough, especially the New York Times piece. It probably wasn't, but it felt like one for me. And so while I was doing that, I was also gathering out others, just little bits of writing, not just from the writers in the book, but other writers that were sort of coming my way. And a number of volunteers sort of stepped forward, seeing what I was doing, and just volunteered to do some translation from the Arabic into their particular language. So translators that I'd never worked with before, and now I work with regularly, like Andrew Lieber from the States, reached out and volunteered to do some translation, and people from the Spanish and the French, translators from those languages, and one particular kind of journalist slash activist reached out to me called Ursula Casagrande. She's a multilingual kind of translator. She's a documentary filmmaker. She's also a journalist. She worked with Manifesto, which is an Italian newspaper, for many years. And she's also involved in various kind of peace negotiation, peace deal kind of work as a translator and interpreter. And she was just incredibly connected and helpful. And she immediately translated a lot of Atef stuff into Spanish. And she had lots of media contacts. So when this war started, I just felt, she could see what I was doing. Atef's was sending me his diaries. I initially didn't realize he was in Gaza because he'd since moved to Ramallah, and I saw him in Gaza a couple of years ago, but it was a one-off visit. He doesn't go that often, so it was a pure fluke that he was there. And once I realized he was there, there were a few days that were missing when he lost his laptop, got broken and things like that. But he was essentially sending me WhatsApp messages and voice notes. And initially it was voice notes, and I was just transcribing them. Ursula just got straight on that and was simultaneously translating into Spanish. She also translates into Basque, and obviously Italian. So we immediately kind of were keeping up in terms of some of the other languages. She's connected to a newspaper called Beria, which is the largest national newspaper in Basque Country. And she also is connected to a publishing house in Italy. So very early on, we had translators kind of volunteering. I also got in touch with a language justice organization, a network of translators called Respond Crisis Translation. And these guys do a lot of language justice, translating things like school documents and health documents for people who don't have access to language, these texts in their original language. So it's such a huge kind of network of thousands of language translation volunteers, and they helped get the diaries ready in Spanish in particular. So yeah, and I kind of knew a network of some publishers, but it was very interesting to see which languages stepped forward in terms of publishing the book. We've now got it in 15 different territories and 13 different languages. Norway's just come on board. But it's very interesting to see which countries are enthusiastic and which are not. And the Spanish, the big papers in Spain were resistant, and we ended up publishing them in a magazine or newspaper in Argentina, instead of going with like El Pay or one of the large Spanish papers. Le Monde came on board very, very late. Guardian was very, very resistant. So yeah, so it was very interesting, and certain languages have been very, very kind of resistant in terms of publishers not stepping forward. So there is no French publisher for it. The German publisher was very late. We now have one, a very, very small German publishing house, and other countries came on board very, very quickly, like Indonesia, Japan, and Korea. The reaction in Japan in particular has been phenomenal. People have been taking the diaries and writing them in permanent marker on the glass walls of government buildings. In Norway, there's like a 24-hour reading of the diaries by something like 40 actors. It's led to kind of, there's been readings at demos in Italy and Spain. It's just led to some very, very beautiful, spontaneous kind of uses of the diary and realizations of the diary, if you like. So yeah, it's been an amazing experience, and a lot of the time it's just been a question of just how quickly can we do this, and everybody racing to do it. The Spanish edition, which was published by Blackie Books, and they also published the Catalan edition, they have now raised, because I should say all of the money all the proceeds go to 3 Gaza relief charities. The Spanish edition has now raised over 161,000 euros for those charities. So one of those charities got a check the other day for 54,000 euros, which is just mind blowing and really, really nice. So yeah, it's been incredible, that side of things.
Thanks, Roth. Thanks so much. Elizabeth, I wanted to, because Saqi sort of uniquely among at least this group works on also visual work. So art books like Kamal Boulata's book, Keep Your Eye on the Wall, which is a sort of a combination of an art book and literary text, and then also, of course, cartooning. I wanted, if you could say something about the kind of different audiences that reaches, and how you've worked, Palestinian visual art into the kind of repertoire at Saqi, both the challenges and the delights of it.
Yeah, of course. But firstly, congratulations, Ra. I didn't realize all of those translation successes, and that's just extraordinary. I don't know if you saw my heart emoji popping up all over the screen, but that is really inspiring, and testament to what good publishing can and should do. And I also wanted to do a shout out to Matthew Teller, who is editor of Daybreak in Gaza, along with Mahmoud Muna, the bookseller at the educational bookshop in Jerusalem, because I can see that Matthew's in the audience.
Hi there. Hello. Sorry, just saying hello. But yeah, carry on, Elizabeth. You're doing a great job. Fantastic.
Thanks, Matthew. And just on the translation, we were really delighted to receive our first translation deal for Daybreak in Gaza from a Bosnian publishing house. So thank you, Kupla. We're really excited about working with you for the first time, and to have that support from Bosnian languages is really meaningful. Yes, I think more so perhaps than any other space that we publish in, or perhaps that anyone publishes in, working with Palestinian writers and creators feels very like a kind of cross-pollination landscape, in that the work that you're doing cannot be separated from a humanitarian angle. It cannot be separated from emotional conversations. It cannot be separated from political conversations in any way. And in the same way, most of the amazing writers that we write with are also, as Ra was saying, they're filmmakers, they're artists, they're activists, they are a million things above and beyond what the rest of us can achieve with our days and skills. And yes, we're really lucky at Saqi because we publish all genres. If a book is great, then we want to do it. We come across quite a lot of them. So we also do cookery, Palestinian cuisine by Christine Nasser. We've published for over a decade. I'd love to do more cookery as well from Palestine, and some of the most poignant pieces in Daybreak in Gaza are about the resilience of culture in the face of genocide and how we take that culture with us. So even if you don't have a kitchen, even if your bakery has been blown up and you're on your third bakery and it's a makeshift one, how amazingly inspired people are with their ingredients and with what they carry with them and what they carry inside them, and keeping that culture alive is a really important part of what we do. Seeing a big resurgence in interest in Palestinian embroidery, unsurprisingly, because it's got such a very long and colourful history, and it feels like something bright and something visual that people can do in a way to show solidarity. Hannah's in her Hannah's sporting a beautiful career as well. So we are publishing a new book called Narrative Threads next year, which is about the way Palestinian embroidery is represented in art. There's a brilliant Instagram account to give you a break from recommending writers' names, the Tatriz Circle, which is run by Joanna Barakat, and that shows kind of amazing historical and also modern Palestinian embroidery. I'd really recommend that. Before everyone came in, we were actually having a quick conversation about another one of the artists that we publish at Saqi, Mohammed Sabene, the political cartoonist, brilliant political cartoonist. We published Palestine in black and white. Oh, I think in 2019. Mohammed has done cartoons for some of the most well-known newspapers in Palestine and kind of across the Arab world. He's really well known for his caricature, and he's won, lots of international awards for that. He's based in Ramallah, and as you can probably imagine, life is not always very easy for him. He's been detained by the Israeli authorities in quite intense ways that I won't going to go into. But we were talking about him because the Lakes Comic Art Festival is coming up soon, and we were really excited that Mohammed's coming over for that his work is part of that. But these things are not always received in the way we would like to see them received, and that's part of the daily backlash that you have against publishing, specifically art from the region, perhaps because it is open to interpretation. People really struggle with their emotions when they're looking at Palestinian art. It often evokes a very immediate and gut-wrenching reaction. And the same is true for whether it's the political cartoons of Mohammed Sabene or beautiful landscapes that are no longer there from Nabil Eneni, who's an incredible Palestinian artist I would recommend, whose monograph we publish. So it feels like a big part of a bigger picture is making sure that art's available, particularly because in the last year, so many of the buildings and places and galleries and the work itself is destroyed or missing. I hope that answered your question, Marsha. I went around the mountains a bit there.
It just really made me think that out of everything that was in this issue of the magazine, the thing that exploded was the cover. And that's the thing that we, that became a kind of a hot point of controversy, because people determined for themselves, well, this means that, etc. So to kind of build on that, I want to jump over to this, to Ra, and then work back to children's literature with Hannah, because Kama has also staged a number of big events with Palestinian writers. I wondered if you could talk about the kind of the challenges that you've faced in that, but also, how you've managed to get through it and to get events put back on the table that were taken off.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. It's not an experience I would recommend anybody goes through, but we have to. So yeah. So towards the beginning of the genocide, I was approached by a Manchester-based British Palestinian theatre maker called Danny Abulhawa. No relation to Susan Abulhawa, no immediate relation. And Danny wanted to put on a kind of supportive, family-friendly kind of music and theatre night. And I said, I've got these diaries by Atef. Maybe we could do a launch for it. I also suggested doing like a kind of memorial for Rafat, who was a friend of ours, Rafat Al-Arare. And Danny, we were sort of developing this idea, and then Danny just said, "Oh, I'm also kind of friends with Kingsley Ben-Adir, who is an amazing superstar, like Hollywood superstar, an incredible actor who's on the rise. He recently played Bob Marley in the Bob Marley biopic One Love, and he was in a Marvel series. He was absolutely fantastic in a Marvel series called Secret Invasion, and he was in the Barbie film and so forth. And he was absolute, Hollywood gold dust. And he was happy to read these stories. And so we got a big venue in Manchester, one of the biggest, called Home. It used to be called Corner House, which is a theatre and cinema space. They said they would put it on. But the moment we also got a couple of other people, Camilla Shams, who was going to read, and Maxine Peake was going to do a thing for it. And the moment we advertised it, or moment Home advertised it on their social media, they got inundated with, they said they got inundated with Zionist complaints about the events, accusing Atef in particular of being an anti-Semitic. The host then shut it down, cancelled it, and didn't really give us any time to counter any of the claims. One of the claims quoted an article Atef had written where he talks about the classic Edward Said thing: the Palestinians are the victims of the victims, and he actually says in it, we would never deny the suffering or the scale of the suffering that the Jewish people went through, etc., etc. But that article, because it made that victims of the victims kind of point, was then quoted as being Holocaust relativism or Holocaust inversion, which, according to some Zionist interpretations, equates to Holocaust denial, which it obviously doesn't. And the host venue was completely incapable of like sifting through any of this. And there was some very strange things going on. We were told that there were hundreds of emails sent, and then in a later meeting, one of the board members said they only saw 2 emails. So we'll never know actually what happened. But after they cancelled it, there was huge sort of outcry because we got our act together really, really quickly. We got translation of the article up online. We showed that it's nonsense. Well, we literally did it overnight because we got our act together very, very quickly. People could see exactly what was going on. And I have my board to thank for that, for getting the statement up so quickly. And there was immediate kind of protests. There was a letter writing. There was like 200 plus actors wrote to complain. Patrons complained. People like Asif Kapadia, the filmmaker, complained, who's a patron of Home. There was a physical protest. There were several. The weekly march ended up outside of the venue, and we ended up reading Atef's diaries in front of the venue. And there was also a joint artist exhibition of artwork by Manchester artists in the building, and 100 artists withdrew their work, leaving just blank walls and statements about it. So there's massive kind of PR nightmare for home, and they tried to pass the event out, and they tried to negotiate sort of, we put on this kind of event, but without ATF, and they just tried everything they could in the book, including like using the fact that I was getting on a plane to try and rush decisions and things like this. But we stood our ground, and they ended up having to reinstate the whole thing exactly as it was originally planned. So that was a fantastic kind of achievement. And in the context of so many other cancellations of Palestinian artists in venues across Britain, just to give you people some idea, there was some context. There's a theatre and art space in cinema in Bristol called the Arnold Feeney, which cancelled 2 Palestinian Film Festival events. The Barbican in London cancelled a lecture by Pankaj Mishra, the academic, called The Show After Gaza. Reem Kalani was cancelled in Bristol. There were just endless cancellations of Palestinian artists across Britain and across Europe, often quoting safety as a concern or something like this. And often responding to pressure from Zionist lobby groups like UK Lawyers for Israel and others. And it's part of a wider kind of cancellation of Palestinian art and pro-Palestinian art. The home event felt like a bit of a turnaround, so we immediately went to try to take our event and take it to other venues. So we took it to the Edinburgh International Book Festival, which we were only able to do after they dropped a dodgy sponsor called Bailey Gifford. And then we were very keen to do it in the Barbican, partly because we wanted to kind of set a precedent for large organizations not bowing to pressure. We knew they would get criticized. We knew they'd get pressure, and they did. When they announced it, there was pressure from letters of complaint and articles written by the UK Lawyers for Israel saying they were breaking the law by because they used the word genocide in their copy, even though they framed it as what Amnesty International says is alarming signs of genocide. They framed it in a particular way, but they still were told by the UK Lawyers for Israel that they were breaking the law by even putting this event on. But fortunately, Barbican stood their ground, and the event went on last weekend. It was fabulous. We had Hind Shafani come over from the States to read. Hind is a poet and writer and filmmaker. She co-wrote The Present. And we had Maxine Peake and Nabil El-Ohabi and Yusra Wasama. So, you know, my 3 favorite actors in the world, pretty much. So it was absolutely, it was great. And we also, the event wasn't just Atef's diaries. We've been working with 3 other writers who've been writing their diaries of the war. Nihil Mahana, who, if you're interested in reading her diaries, they're in a magazine called Agni Online, AGNI, and also in Literary Hub. And Sundar Sabra, who's a young translator and English literature graduate, and a writer called Allah Obeid. But these are mostly writers that we met ourselves in person. I went to on a family kind of holiday in summer of 2022, spent a month in Gaza. And as we were saying earlier, it's incredible how much literature there is coming out of Gaza. I was taken by a friend of mine, a brilliant writer, Talal Abu Shawish, who we published a couple of times. Talal took me to 2 or 3 events a day. It was non-stop. There aren't 2 or 3 literature events a day in Manchester, but there are in Gaza. And there are lots of different kind of groupings and collectives. There's the Union of the Writers Union, which is one kind of world. And then Rifat took us around loads of other kind of writers groups. There's the university sort of writers groups. There's lots of writers groups associated with different art centres and NGO kind of cultural centres. So there's loads and loads and loads of writing going on, being done, sometimes in parallel. Sometimes different groups of writers never meet other groups of writers because they just live in different worlds. But there's so much going on; it's incredible. It's not like there are loads of challenges, and when you put on a Palestinian event, you need to sort of tell yourself that you're going to be you're going to need to speak to your lawyer a few times. And you don't necessarily need to shell out money on libel cases, but you might need to think about it at some point. You will need to kind of prepare your organization for attacks. We got attacked, we got horrible cyber attacks on the night that Rifat was killed just by posting a picture of him. We're constantly, attacked online for various things. So you just have to kind of prepare yourself for things like that. And the battle carries on. In Manchester, there's a very big theatre called the Royal Exchange, probably the biggest theatre. It was putting on a production of Midsummer Night's Dream, in which it's a kind of modern dress version of Midsummer Night's Dream, inspired by rave culture. There's a scene in the production where people were chanting free Palestine and pro-trans rights chants, and the whole production was told they can't include those bits. And then everybody's walked. So the entire cast has basically walked, and there's not going to be a show at the Royal Exchange for the next month and a half. It's just going to be an empty building because the trustees came down and said you can't say anything pro-Palestinian, and that's the situation we're in at the moment. Most artists, most staff at these venues are pro-Palestinian, as Omar was saying the other night, Omar from Palfest, but the board of directors, the trustees, the kind of administrators at the very top are pro-establishment and pro-Zionist. So you'll continually have that battle, and it won't go away anyway anytime soon. But these are some of the things that you have to kind of just get your head down and kind of run into it. Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. So I think we have just a little bit of time left. I wanted to ask Hannah to talk about children's literature, not because it's my personal passion, although it is. And I do think that Palestinian children's literature is the center of Arabic children's literature, the beating heart of it. But also because it is an incredibly important genre. And Interlink has done some important work publishing Palestinian writers in English, as well as translating Palestinian writers. And then you also have written your own children's book, Homeland, My Father Dreams of Palestine. So I want to offer Hannah the chance to take us out.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for my counterparts. I have to echo, the sort of volatility and violence that, being in a Western country and trying to, advocate for Palestine brings you. We have also experienced, as you can imagine, death threats. And this is not just since October 7th. I think I was 9 years old when I heard the first voicemail that someone had left threatening to burn our building down. This is something that we have faced our entire lives as Palestinians, but also as those who are unapologetically platforming Palestinians and those who fight for liberation. The children's book world is really interesting because it's experiencing a massive book banning campaign by the right in the United States. And of course, this includes Palestinian books. The only difference is that the organizations that have been formed whose sole purpose is to advocate against these book bans are not standing up for books when they're written by Palestinians. So organizations like the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators or PEN America have really turned their backs on this issue, even though, censorship of Palestinian voices is one of the top line issues that we're facing, far more than queer writers or other marginalized communities. We are seeing just unprecedented levels of censorship here in the United States. And of course, our media is, highly biased and uses incredibly passive voices when talking about the violence in Palestine in order to manufacture consent for the US's participation in this genocide. So the children's book world, while has incredible tools to fight book bans, have not, in fact, been lending those tools to Palestinian writers. So just a few examples. Our book, We Are Palestinian by Reem Kassis, was one of the books that was targeted in the New York Public Library system, where a Zionist couple decided to go to every branch of the New York Public Library system, check out the books, and then burn them on Twitter. My book was also included in that, and several others by Palestinians. And in fact, the librarian who had put them on display lost her job after this instance. It was featured in the New York Post and several other right-wing media sources, and was applauded in those publications. Since then, we have also heard from librarians that their library systems and teachers are told not to display books by Palestinians or with the word Palestine on the cover, because they are worried about being, falsely accused of anti-Semitism. And in fact, we're even seeing an appropriation of the DEI anti-racist model now with organizations like the ADL and Project Shima, who are building in Zionist talking points and rhetoric to their DEI, diversity and inclusion trainings for educators. So we recently here in Northampton, Massachusetts, where we're located, opposed a training on anti-Semitism, which largely focused on defending Zionist talking points and was incredibly racist against Palestinians and Arabs. So we're seeing this at the education level. We're seeing this in publicly funded libraries. It's gone as far as to, warrant security at a lot of events. I've done over 100 events in the last year, and every single one of them has required security because of the amount of death threats and rape threats that I receive on a daily basis. And I'm a children's book writer, and my children's book has a fart in it. So it's, I'm not writing serious topics. I am, truly just representing the lived experience of my family and my people. We've also published a book called Young Palestinians Speak. This book actually came out in 2014, and we have just reissued it. And it has officially been banned in the state of New Jersey from the public library systems, simply because it includes a pre-Nakba map of Palestine. So we have been seeing this, across the board in such a dramatic way. But at the same time, there have been concerted efforts from children's book authors, librarians, teachers, publishers who have rallied together to uplift these books. My book has since won national awards, and I am being flown all over the country to speak about my lived experience, about children's literature, particularly Palestinian children's literature. So while it's an incredibly combative environment, it's also been incredibly hopeful to see how many people are rallying in this space.
Thank you so much. We're being told that we need to end now, and I do want to end on that actual positive note instead of, and the fart. So thank you guys all for coming today and speaking on this panel.
Thanks so much for having us.